Good afternoon. My name's Liz Rowlinson. I'm an overseas property journalist. We're here to do a webinar about buying in Italy. Fantastic country. I visit every year. I'm married into an Italian family. It's a great subject to be talking about for an hour. So I would love to introduce my panel of experts. Linda Travella.
Hello, hi everybody. Thanks, Liz.
Linda, tell me, you're based between the UK and Italy, aren't you?
That's right. I'm based between the two, spending a little bit more time than I'd like in the UK at the moment due to the restrictions, but soon hopefully be off to Italy. I've been selling property in Italy for a very long time, more than 25 years. We do sell almost all over Italy, not quite, but almost. And I know most of the areas and many of the properties that I actually sell. So I think that very much is helpful to people when I can talk about different areas. So rather than being an area, I can suggest different areas to them. I speak Italian, so I'm married to an Italian, so from Lake Como. So that helps as well. I think you've got to be able to speak the language, in my opinion, to be able to negotiate the best price for your clients.
Thanks. Stefano, tell us about your history of being an Italian lawyer.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stefano Lucatello. I'm senior partner of an international law firm based in Chelsea. And my background is that I've been doing this sort of job for 30 odd years, helping English people mainly buy property abroad, amongst other countries, Italy. My parents are both Italian. My father's from Florence, my mum's from Rome. So I go back quite often. And it never fails to amuse me how many English people go across, and it's becoming ever more popular to buy in Italy, even more so than France, possibly in Spain at the moment. But it's a great country to buy in, and I'd urge everyone to buy in Italy.
Indeed, that's what we're here to talk about. And Dave, you're in the Abruzzo, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Thanks very much for having us on here, Liz. We're based in Abruzzo. I'm one of the partners at Vigna Verdi. We look after property sales and restorations around where we live. I also married an Italian, yes, I've been coming here for the last 20-something years, and we set up in business around about 15 years ago.
Brilliant. And are things slightly getting back to normal in Italy at the moment? How is it where you are?
Yes, I mean, it's still quite strange at the minute. I mean, a lot of the restrictions have been lifted. We're not allowed to move out of our own region at the moment. And things like bars and restaurants are now open. They were open from this week, from last week. I don't think people are in the full swing of it yet. There's still quite a few nerves around. Luckily in Abruzzo, the numbers weren't too high, but obviously watching the television and the problems that have been around the country, I think confidence is taking a while, but yeah, I think it's starting to feel a little bit more normal, should we say.
Brilliant. And as Stefano said, we're getting a lot of interest from our website in Italy at the moment. We had some webinars last week, lots of questions about Italy. So we're going to try and answer your questions as they come in. There's a box on the right where you can ping over, there's a question mark, you can send over questions. So if you hear anything you'd like to spark your interest, do ping us a question, and I'll try to get to as many as soon as possible. I'd like to kick off with a poll just to see whereabouts in Italy, why you're buying in Italy. The first question is, why are you looking to buy a property in Italy? Is it A, so you can move there full time, B, to buy a holiday home, or C, as an investment property? We'll see the results in a sec. Italy is very much a lifestyle destination rather than pure investment, but we'll see if that's coming out in the results. And yeah, 58% would like a holiday home, 38% moving full time, that's quite impressive, and 4% an investment property. Brilliant. So Linda, is that a surprise, or would that be the sort of mix that you would expect from buyers and property hunters?
I would say, Liz, that generally the second home is the most popular, but I'm interested about the relocation because I've had a lot more interest in relocation application literally since we've been in lockdown, more or less. There's been a lot more interest. I would have expected possibly the investment properties to be a bit higher, but I think that people have the idea that Italy's too expensive and they can't afford to invest there, some people, whereas of course, as I'm sure Dave and Stefano will tell us as well, that isn't the case. So I would have expected a bit higher on the investment, but most people are, what I would say, buying second homes, but not holiday homes. So they're going there many times a year. They're not just going, you know, a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. And physical viewings of properties allowed in Italy now?
They are allowed. They are actually allowed if you can get to the country, but masks are obligatory. So you have to wear a mask anyway in public places. Actually, viewings are allowed. So the Italians can view, if they, you know, or anyone that's there can view. Mask and gloves are required. But what we're offering at the moment are video viewings. So if clients really keen on something, they can view by video. But a lot of the lockdown, as Dave just mentioned, is starting to be lifted, and from the 3rd of June the quarantine is being lifted. The 11th the beaches are open, the 15th the theatres and cinemas, and from about the 23rd many big hotels are opening. So I would say to people, look on the government website, because it's very, very clear and it gives you very good guidelines on what's open and what's not, and the way to for travel, etc. And EasyJet are starting flights, certainly to some destinations, and the Italian airports are starting to open. So I think by the end of June, things are going to be looking a bit better. But as Dave said, it's just sort of needs that another month probably to move forward.
Sure, and we need to know whether, as Britons, we can actually fly there with our own government rules as well. So, Stefano, have you been able to do any business during the lockdown? What can you do and what can't you do now? And you know, how's it been?
Well, I mean, fortunately, 90%, 99% of our clients are all email-based clients, so we don't need to see clients physically to touch them and whatever and be in their company. The only part of our business that we do need to see them for physically is the notary public side of things, where David, my colleague partner, has to do powers of attorney, for example. And we've noticed, as you would do, a substantial increase in request for people saying, I need to go ABC country, we can't get out there, can you do me a power of attorney for my mum, my dad who's over there, etc., etc. So we've done quite a few of those, and we've exercised the normal distancing rules. The one problem has been in London, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has been shut for a lot of weeks. It has only just reopened about 10 days ago. They are now quoting a 6 to 7 working day backlog, as opposed to being able to do a same-day service in many cases if you do London like we are. So the problems we've had are those. The notarios offices, well, mainly as a blanket rule, they all shut, then they gradually started opening, then they started doing things by email. Estate agents, as the guys know, they all shut down and started working remotely. Now they're coming back in, some showings are happening. So we haven't really seen, apart from clients dropping off the face of the earth, as it were, Italy, because the last thing they wanted to do is think about buying a property abroad, because they had to think about surviving, let alone buying a second property abroad. However, I will draw an analogy with Brexit, which is that people have so quickly had enough of this that now saying, we want to get out of this, let's start looking on email, on the internet, and let's start talking to people, let's start doing the preparatory things that we need to do, that we can do without physically either going or seeing or touching people. So yeah, it started to come back again, and gradually, as you said, though, it will be a problem. There's going to be a conflict, I think, between what Italy will allow us to do and what we are allowed to do as UK citizens, whether we can go out, come in, quarantine when we get to the other side, and each country brings with it a different set of rules. I'll shut up. It's over to you, Liz.
Brilliant. And then just a quick question. We know the Italian economy is going to be bad as much as same as ours and Spain's and a lot of other places. But what about mortgages? Do you think that that's the is Italian banks still lending money?
Yes, there is a lot of liquidity about with the Italian banks. The Italian banks have a willingness to lend, subject to the criteria of being able to see people go through their assets, their liabilities, and check that. Most of that can be done online. There are certain things, though, that Italian banks have been notoriously keen to do face-to-face, as have most foreign banks, which is they like to see the person sat in front of them before they go any further and give the final okay. But yeah, it's coming back, Liz, gradually, yeah.
Brilliant. And Dave, how has it been for you in the Abruzzo? Have you seen a resurgence of inquiries, a difference in what people are asking for?
Now, to be honest with you, it's been a little bit of a pause for people. People are still there. People are still ready to come out. It's obviously with the lockdowns and things like that, it's not been possible. And as Stefano said, the actual thing of just surviving, as horrible as it is to say that, is a reality at the moment. But I think people that have a dream of owning a property in Italy or moving to Italy, that is still there. I mean, the number of emails that we've been doing throughout this period is pretty much like it would be in normal times. And a lot of people are just saying to me, we're just desperate to get out. So it's I don't think, hopefully, there's not going to be the big fall off the end of the cliff. If people stick, I think it obviously all depends how things go over the next month or so with the virus. But hopefully, if things start getting back to normal, I could imagine autumn being the big time. Summer months are not usually for us anyway. Sort of August time, whenever the schools are closed in the UK. So during the 6-week holidays, if you like, the August period is not our busiest time anyway. Which thankfully for us, we can take that as our holiday time. So I'm expecting more towards autumn to see a real change.
And of course, your region's perfectly placed for rural properties, and I'm seeing across different countries and in the UK a demand. People want to move out of the cities and have more space, living space, just a reset, work from home in a lovely sort of home office in the garden, etc. Are you seeing, any requests for?
Well, I would say it's the biggest market anyway. I would say the rural properties and the smaller towns and that kind of thing, especially in Abruzzo. It's actually, strangely enough, we've had a lot of Italians that usually would flee from the countryside into the towns and cities. And strangely enough, we're getting a number of inquiries, and it has been, I've read a couple of articles on this, where people are looking back at the countryside again as well. There's lots of advantages, not only in these times, but when you're in the countryside, life during lockdown has been so much easier than some of my family and some of other people I've spoken to in the towns and cities. And people, especially Italians, they do think about things like that. And a lot of the older people, I think, would love for their children and grandchildren to come back to the countryside. So you never know, there could be a newfound love for the countryside from the Italians, not just from us overseas buyers.
Thanks. And another trend is that locations that one can drive to are also showing an upspike, whether it's northern France or northern Spain, we're seeing. Linda, what about northern Italy? You cover Liguria, don't you? And as well as the lakes. Are you seeing, I know that area's been quite badly hit, some of it, but I mean, are you seeing an interest? Do you think that's going to be a factor?
To be honest, I think the driving is very helpful because people can drive very easily, particularly to Western Liguria, which is the one on the border of the Côte d'Azur, on the border of France, and the lakes. And I think that the various reasons, I think the first thing is that people can travel from those areas to other parts of Italy and other parts of Europe. So I think that's important. And for people that want to, actually are happy to fly, at the moment, the flights to Italy are not going, but for example, Gatwick to Nice, EasyJet is starting a flight in the middle of June, so you could easily get on that flight and go and view. Because I think the problem we've got at the moment, as we were saying, is the quarantine that we're putting forward, not because Italy's quarantine is being lifted from the 3rd of June.
Yeah.
Though watch this space for, but I think that the lakes as well, Maggiore and Como specifically, because there in Liguria, in terms of going from when you get to the border to your property is going to be a short drive. So it might be an hour, it might be an hour and 10 minutes, it might be 45 minutes. So I think that makes a difference to people when they're selecting a property, particularly I think for a second home.
Yeah, for quick trips. Okay, well, we're going to see where everyone is interested in. So we're going to do another poll. What is your chosen area of Italy? Is it A, the north, the Alps, the lakes, Liguria, which we've just been talking about? Is it B, the sort of what I call the green heart of Italy, Tuscany, Umbria, the Abruzzo, Le Marche, Molise? Is it C, the south, including the Amalfi Coast, the islands, Sicily, Sardinia? And we're going to see what we come up with. And I think, it's 58% for the lovely bit in the middle, Tuscany, Umbria, Abruzzo. You'll be glad to hear, Dave, Marche. 28% sorry, 26 for the south and 15 for the north. Interesting.
I think a lot of it, if I can just say, I think a
Yeah.
lot of it, as well, to be fair, is budget based as well. Obviously, there's a huge difference between properties in parts of the north compared to the central regions and Abruzzo in particular. So obviously that has to be taken into consideration. The travelling, I understand what you were saying before about sort of northern areas, people driving. I think that matters to Northern Europeans such as Germans, Dutch, people like that. I don't think it matters too much to the UK market, because at the end of the day, whether you have to get an aeroplane or a boat, or you have to make that effort. You can't just go for a quick weekend drive down to your place, and even if you lived on the very border, it's still an effort to get over the channel, so to speak. So yeah, I do think. I think the centre. I think the central areas at the moment are where some of the bargains are, and it is fairly undiscovered in some of these regions.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Linda, one of the many reasons, well, we've covered why the Italian lakes are still very popular. Why is there, and they're quite good for rentals as well. Why are that? Why is that?
I think because it's very, I think looking at the poll, I would suspect that the reason for that at the moment is the fact that the pandemic has mainly hit Lombardy. So I'm sure that is one of the reasons that the poll is showing that, although we are still seeing a lot of interest and a lot of relocation interest on Lake Maggiore, which is something completely new from my point of view. But I think that the lakes I think it's because of their position, to be honest with you. I think, and if you fly to Milan, when you can fly to Milan, there are 3 different airports, and there are so many flights daily to Milan. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons that the lakes remain popular. Apart from obviously their natural beauty, and they're on the border of Switzerland. You can drive to Germany, you can drive to Austria. I take Dave's point as well, but I think people, particularly people if they're in business, they can buy a second home on one of the lakes, and if they're doing business in Europe, they can drive to other parts of Europe actually very easily. So I think that is a very important point, and I think going alongside the fact that you've got very good facilities in the lakes, you've got no problem with internet. If you get a rural property, you have to be sensible and be careful to make sure, even some parts of Tuscany where we sell, which is also obviously popular, you still have to check in some of the more rural areas about the internet connection. So I think that's another important point.
And just a question from the audience on the lakes, just while you're there, Linda. A very quick answer, if you may. We've been looking over 5 years for a property in the lakes. Do you have any suggestions for locations which are relatively level and within walking distance of amenities? Because obviously the lakes, it's quite, they sort of go down to they're not all flat, are they?
No, they're not. I think it does depend on budget, to be fair, but I would say that the central part of Lake Como or Stresa on Lake Maggiore, but obviously something closer, you're going to get a better view if you're further away from the lake, but closer to the lake, you might not have a view, but you might be just within walking distance. We've got properties sort of even at very good prices around 100,000, where you're 5 minutes walk from the lake and you haven't got the problem with it being steep. So I would say the central part of Como or Stresa on Lake Maggiore would be my 2 choices.
Brilliant. And just turning to some practicalities, Stefano, what are the key legal things that property hunters have to consider when they're starting out their search for and doing their research as they are now?
Well, I don't think there's any substitution or substitute for good due diligence. Due diligence is the checklist. You want to write down a checklist, and I have a checklist which is checking the current ownership, checking if there's any mortgages on the property, checking the boundaries, checking whether what's been built is legal. We have a lot of, in Italy, we have a lot of what's called abusivo. Abusivo is something that's been built illegally, and people try to sell the properties on. And if you don't get it right, you will take it on board. You could have the property destroyed, reduced to rubble by the local authority if they're that way inclined, or a penalty. Sometimes it's not possible to have a retrospective consent granted, so you have to pay a fine or have it knocked down. So it depends which comune you're in and which area of Italy you're in for that. fiscal code number, you can't buy anything in Italy without a fiscal code number. So going back to basics, I always say to clients, well, before you go out there, do two things. One is for Italy, get a fiscal code, and secondly, try and open a bank account, because you'll need those two before you can go anywhere, whether it's for buying process or whether it's for funding afterwards. Residents, do the Residenza application as well if it's your intention to go out there long term. Like we've just seen, Liz, the poll has shown that many more many more English people than I thought are now thinking about going there permanently, because for one reason or other they want to move over there. So get your Residenza done. Just a note on that, until the 31st of December this year, the Residenza application is no different from what it has been for many years. After the 31st of December, when we leave Europe permanently, we're in this transition stage now, it will change. More paperwork, longer times, even longer than we're used to now, and it could take you a long time to do so. So those in essence are the checklist. And of course, importantly, make sure you've got the right amount of money to buy and to cover the costs, estate agents, legal, taxation, dependent, and we'll touch this in a minute, but dependent on how you're buying and what you're buying, the taxation in Italy changes, of course.
And do you have to be resident in Italy for a certain length of time before you can apply for your residencia?
The Residenza at the moment, as it stands, because we're still in the EU until the 31st of December, the transitional period, we have the same rights that we've always had. So you can stay there for 90 days. If your intention is to stay longer than 90 days, then you have to apply for a permanent Residenza, and you put the application in. You can do your Residenza application even before you're there. You don't need to have been there, but if it's your intention to be there over 90 days, you must do it within the 90-day period.
Yeah, because we're seeing a lot of people trying to rush to buy in other countries before, so they can be resident for 3 months, so they can get their residencia. So
my understanding on that, sorry Liz, my understanding on that is, you've probably say different to Stefan, I'm not sure, but provided you've actually put in for residence by the 31st of December, you've actually got June, I understand, of the following year.
Yes,
so
you've got to
gone in by the end of this year. It's
not
like the 31st is the deadline and that's it. No more residents, no more English allowed to become residents.
No. Let me just clarify that point. Sorry, Liz. If you make the application as a Brit before 31st of 12 o'clock midnight on the 31st of December, then your rights are those that we have always had since 1974 when we came into the common market. After that, no, Dave's right. Forgive me if I even understood, but the application can still be made, but the methodology and the application forms will change for those people who are coming from the United Kingdom as United Kingdom citizens. Just an aside, we've had, like we did through Brexit, a load of people coming to us to swear allegiance to another country. So if you have a second nationality from mum and dad, grandparents, like Ireland, Southern Ireland, or anywhere else, I would urge people to get that second nationality because it will allow you free movement within the Schengen countries.
Brilliant. And another question, Dave, I'm going to ask you. We've got a question from Wendy Wilson. Is it easier to purchase a property from a British owner? And that might allude to the fact of whether you want to do a sterling deal direct. I don't know. What's your answer to that?
Certainly no easier. It doesn't really make any difference. I mean, sometimes there can be something done where you do a deal in sterling. I often find most owners, even British owners, don't really like the sterling idea because somebody's going to lose out somewhere or another. So at the moment, the euro is obviously the strongest. So anybody selling here in Italy to go back to the UK could potentially, based on let's say a year ago when the euro was over 120, now down at 110, 111. On 100,000, that's already 10,000 that they're gaining. So I do think in times like this, you find the sellers over here would rather do it in euros.
Oh, he's gone.
Can I make a comment on?
Yes, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of occasions where people wanted to do that, and it really isn't a good idea because whatever you do, something's going to go wrong because someone's going to argue about the exchange rate, even if it's done on the day. So I would say it makes no difference, as Dave said, whether you buy from someone who's British or not. It's very important, keep it in euros. If the sales in euros, which all mine are, then
Yeah.
that's what you're doing, and that's the way it is.
Sure, and we should always use a currency broker. There's no reason not to when transferring funds. We have a placeinthesun.com currency, which you can see on the website. A question, Stefano, which I'm going to address your way, from Vicky Schmidt. Is it better to get a UK or Italian mortgage?
When you are buying abroad, for many reasons, I would always say go for a foreign mortgage. The first one is that if something were to go wrong in the future, then the first port of call for the creditor bank would be your foreign property and not your main or only your principal residence in the United Kingdom. And if you have a family and young kids, you stand to lose, or you could lose, your home where your kids are. The second point is that the rates of interest abroad are usually better than the rates of interest in the United Kingdom, always been better. And you can get longer term mortgages abroad than you can in the United Kingdom. Now, the calculation for whether you're eligible or not is different abroad. But having said that, for those three main reasons, I would always go for a foreign mortgage, a euro mortgage, pay it from a euro account, as Linda says. If you're getting a mortgage in euros, you don't want to be paying in sterling. Set up an account, put it money in euros so that it goes out in euros. But yes, that's foreign mortgage, foreign property.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Dave, a question for you. I mean, on Italian education, because I know you've got a son at school. I mean, I know it's quite a divisive subject because expats have told me they think the Italian system is quite didactic. It cannot be for everyone. But what is the education like in state schools, from Kerry Watson?
Well, I've got two children here, one 13, one 17. I find the education system fantastic. It is different to the UK in the sense of there is a lot more of the old-fashioned sort of a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of the basic things. But I find the education system excellent. We'll see in future, but I've been told by many people that when they receive, we have lots of clients that have businesses in the UK that have said whenever they get Italian people coming to work for them, there is seems to be a different level there, and I would agree with them. I hear that from a number of people. So and even on things like during this time as well, during the crisis time, in this period, the schools have set up incredibly quickly to get the kids back to school, in the sense of it's all online, but the day after lockdown, the children were in front of screens doing exactly what we're doing today, and that was excellent. So I can't complain up to now. We will see as time goes on.
Brilliant. And actually, a question, I'll direct this to Linda. Has this crisis thrown up any opportunities for buyers yet, Linda, that you're aware of? I mean, I know Italians will probably be loath to reduce their prices unless they very much have to, which might be too early to tell. But what's your response?
I think definitely it will be really a buyer's market, but I've noticed that some, and it goes with what Dave was saying, some clients are taking their properties off the market, some of the Italians, the ones in the country, because they want to move to them themselves. However, I think we're going to see that around, we're not seeing it immediately now, but I think once we get to the autumn, the answer is yes. And I think we should have more flexibility on negotiating. And the people that don't want to drop their prices probably will take their property off the market. I think that's the most likely thing. So yes, but make sure you're organised first. So you know, if you need finance, please, you know, do some groundwork first. Don't just go out there and say, oh yes, well, we might like this property, but you know, we haven't got the money. So as Stefano said before, make sure that you work out how much you've got to spend. And if it's going to be a purchase, you don't need finance, that's fine. We can negotiate even better for you, because that, you know, that's much easier and less time consuming, obviously. But the thing is to make sure that you take professional advice, because contracts are binding in Italy. So that's one thing that is very important. It's a much better system in my opinion, but if clients went ahead without any professional advice, they could find themselves having problems because they would possibly sign something that they, you know, that they tied into. So the answer is take professional advice to make sure that you're covered.
Yeah. And Stefano,
sorry. I was just going to jump in just quickly on that one. Just I do think because the price thing has been, I've had a number of emails people asking what do you think about the Italian property market. The country is so different, as we all know, and the prices are so different. It's very difficult to say the Italian property market will do this, because every region is different. And for instance, where we are in Abruzzo and lots of other areas, even parts of Lazio or Le Marche, what you'll find is the prices are very low anyway. There's only so far they can go before an owner will think, I just won't sell, because I would say 90%, if not more than 90%, of properties that we sell are empty. They're excess houses. They don't need to be sold. They're not people that are waiting to sell to move on. They tend to be properties that maybe the families that have thought, okay, we already have 6, 7, 8 houses. We don't need this one anymore. Let's look to sell. But in my experience, I've not met any Italian yet that would happily give the property away, no matter what the time is like.
No, me neither. Stefano, 2 quick questions which go towards addressing one of the questions we've been asked. How long is the typical purchase process in Italy, and what is just a good ballpark for purchase cost to allow to, what budget?
Right. How long's a reel of string, Liz? Because normally, if everything goes right, if there's no problems with the buyer, if there's no problems with the seller, and you can identify the seller, it's usually the case the further south in Italy you go, the more problems you find with property ownership, because someone appears to be the owner, then all of a sudden his brother, his mother, his father, his grandfather, and all these siblings come out of the woodwork, and we're left to have to piece together everything, get everyone around the table, powers of attorney, whatever. And also, if there's a mortgage, if there's an Italian mortgage, you have to wait for that to be processed as well. Ballpark 12 weeks, most 12 weeks. If you're lucky, 12 weeks, most 16 weeks, 4 months. But even, I mean, I've done some in 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 6 weeks. If everything falls into place, Liz, then you can actually do it in 6, 7 weeks, because the system is, as Linda said, the system in Italy is very, very good. Just one point on the contracts, though. There are 2 main types of contracts, preliminary, and the bilateral contract is the compromesso di compravendita, which is more akin that we have in England, where buyer and seller both sign or subscribe to a document. The other one is the proposta unilaterale, the unilateral proposal. English people have got to be, the British people have got to be certain that they understand what they're signing, because the proposta unilaterale is binding one way. Even though there's only one party who signs it, it's binding on you for a period of about 14 days, where you're just left hanging there waiting for the vendor to decide whether he's going to sign the document or not sign the document. So you're not free to go and choose another one within that period. So you must take proper legal advice when choosing the methodology of going forward with which contract you go forward with.
The quickest we've sold a property has been 10 days. Is the quickest that we've shown a house to somebody that they fell in love with. And I think a lot of the delays as well are the fact that people have to go back to the UK, maybe get their funds together, sort things out sort of in the UK. If you're here in Italy, as this couple were, they were here for 2 weeks. They found a house that they loved on day 1, and before they left Italy, they bought the property. So it is possible, if everything is in order and you've got the right people working with you, then it is possible to do extra.
And very briefly, Stefano, what purchase costs? 7%?
No, more. If you are buying the house, the home, as a second home, as a seconda casa, not your primary, with the intention not to be your primary residence, then if you're buying from a private person, as a private person, it's 9%, plus all the other bits and pieces. I usually say about 13%. If you're buying with your intention to go there as a main or only principal residence, and you're getting a residenza, then that 9% drops to 2%. So you're talking about maybe 7% at the most. So it's very different. And also, if you're buying a new property from a developer, you don't pay stamp duty as such, you pay VAT. If it's your main home, 4%. If it's your second home, 10%.
Just to add one quick thing there, Liz, for people that are looking at the cheaper properties, there are properties available even around 20,000 euros. 10% would not cover that. Unfortunately, the lower end properties, they take the highest percentage because there are lots of fixed prices. A lot of that can be agents' fees. There's fixed prices sometimes for your notary and things like that. So if you're buying a property at 20%, it could be much higher, even as much as 30%, even heading towards 40%. So you need to be careful on that. You can pay similar sort of fees on a property of 15, 20,000 as you can for a property of 100 to 150,000. So you really need to ask your agent, because they will give you the information that you need to get a good calculation going on that. Don't take percentages as gospel.
No, I mean, need a good lawyer, good agent. These are all things that the buyers need to have. We're gonna ask the final poll for the session is, what sort of location do you seek? Is it A, town/city, D, outskirts of a village, C, by the beach, D, a rural isolation? Well, we've already touched on this subject at the beginning, perhaps the growing appetite for tranquility and isolation. But we'll see if that's borne out by the poll. We've got 52% on the outskirts of a village, so you can walk to the bars and restaurants perhaps. 27% by the beach, 15% in a town city, yeah, not too high, and 5% in rural isolation.
I would agree with that. I think that's pretty. That's pretty much what we get, because I think isolation, people worry about isolation, but a lot of rural properties are not as isolated as what people may think. But what I will say, I'm going to burst maybe quite a few bubbles here. In my opinion, the worst properties, or some of the worst properties, are the ones on the outskirts of towns. And the reason for that is you either should be in the town, in the historical centre, the kind of place that British and overseas buyers like to buy. We like the older properties. We love the magic of the historical sort of areas, but a lot of people want the outside space, and sometimes the historical centres are quite limited. So a lot of people think the outskirts is the best. But as Italian towns have grown, obviously over the years, your new apartment blocks, your petrol stations, your things like that will be put on the outskirts of the village. So what I find here is you're either in the historical part or you're going to be a little bit out. You asked, it's not the easiest of things to try and get something where you can be in a nice, tranquil, beautiful location with a little bit of land and just a little walk into a town, because of the way the towns are set up. It's not always that easy. Maybe 5-10 minutes drive or half an hour walk. To me, they're the best properties.
Brilliant. Linda, a question I'm going to direct at you. We have touched on the residencia issue. Is there any advantage of buying prior to Brexit completing?
I think, as Stefano said, it's going to be very much easier, less paperwork, which will probably mean less cost from your lawyer, quite frankly. I'm sure Stefano would agree with that. So I think, yes, if you can manage to buy beforehand, I think the answer to that is yes, definitely shorter. Well, as Stefano said about the amount of time, and also we're not quite sure what's going to happen. So probably initially it might be okay, but we're not really quite sure. So if you've got the possibility and the capability of buying this year, I would say there's two advantages. One, it's before Brexit, and two, basically you should, in theory, be able to buy at a very good price. So I think that the answer is yes, if you can.
But if I was an American buying a property in Italy, I don't pay more purchase tax than an EU person, do I? So it's mainly to do with the residence situation.
Actually, everybody, I think it's a very important point to make, actually, Liz, that if you're buying, as Stefano said, a prima casa, i.e. your first home and main home, the Italians, the Germans, the Swiss, the Americans, everyone pays the same. So if you're buying a second home, it doesn't mean that the Italians don't have to pay taxes for a second home. They do. So it's the same for everybody. It isn't any different. It's a very, I think it's actually quite a simple process, as long as you do it with a professional and you don't do it yourself.
And just quickly as well, just to throw one thing, sorry, Stefano, just about taxes, but people have got to consider as well taxes on the land. So if you're buying a property that has 2 hectares of land, it doesn't matter whether you're becoming resident or non-resident, tax on land is the same for everybody. So you usually pay around about 15% on taxes on land. So that's regardless of whether you're going to be resident or whether it's an Italian buying or an overseas person buying. So that's something to consider if you do find a property with a lot of land, and in particular, land that may be edificabile, which is building land, because they have very, very high values. So just remember there is a percentage to pay as well on taxes on land.
Did you
Just
want to
one
add?
thing I wanted to say, Liz, was in Italy, anyone can buy in Italy as long as the Italian citizen can buy in the other country that the other person comes from. For example, India is a problem. I have 2 Indian clients at the moment in the United Kingdom who are wanting to buy in Italy, and they can't do so as physical people. They have to do it through a company. So you need to check whether there is reciprocity between your country and Italy. If there is, no problem whatsoever. And remember also that when you buy, the purchase price is agreed, but it may not be the purchase price that appears on the rogito, which is the conveyance deed, because since 2006 we're able to put a lower price in, which therefore reduces the price. And also you can use the cadastral value, which is akin to the rateable value, as opposed to the main price that you've agreed to pay over.
Sure, that's very useful advice. And we had a question about how does the Spanish buying process vary from the Italian, and we've touched on some of that already, and we haven't got time to go into. We could talk about that for 2 hours, but one key difference is that there are a lot more agents in Spain that speak English. There's no doubt about that. Dave, I mean, what's the difference between it's quite hard buying through agents that don't speak English, isn't it? I mean, that's something that property hunters have to navigate.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons why most agents don't speak English is because to become an estate agent in Italy, you have to pass quite a grueling exam, and you have to have a very good level of Italian to be able to do that. So you don't get masses of expats that will come out and suddenly say we're going to sell houses from tomorrow, because in Italy it is highly regulated. So which goes on to another reason to say that you must make sure that when you're dealing with agents, when you're looking on the internet, that these people are correctly registered, because that can cause problems as well. But that's the main reason why you find the difference there is because of this exam.
Liz,
Brilliant.
can I come in there if there's time?
Yeah.
You can make sure I mean, there are, for example, you don't have to buy from someone in Italy. I'm not saying don't, but yes, make sure they speak the language. They can be in the UK or wherever. But I think the other thing that people need to remember is that when you buy property in Italy, you pay commission to the agent. Now, it doesn't matter whether you buy from an Italian agent or you buy from someone in the UK or somewhere else, you will pay commission. Some clients believe that if they buy in Italy, they won't do that. But as Dave, I'm sure, will confirm, you do have to. And because it's different from the UK, that's something that people find a little bit strange initially when they're looking into the purchase of a property in Italy.
I think if you can use an agent quickly, just to say that is used to dealing with people from overseas, they can obviously help out a little bit more. But we do things like open bank accounts, sort of codis fiscals. So I think people that are used to dealing with foreign buyers, you will get that little bit more. That's not giving any talking bad about any agents in Italy, but obviously there is language limitations, and the actual job of an estate agent in Italy is not to sort out your bank account, is not even to take you to the notary's office. For them, that part is your problem, if you like. So to deal with somebody who's used to dealing with international clients, I would say would be better if you can find them in the areas you're looking in.
Sure, we're getting snowed under with questions, so I'm going to do a round of quick fire ones at the end. But just before we get to that, Stefano, can you touch on briefly the issue of inheritance, because it does work slightly differently in Italy, doesn't it?
In England, we have in the United Kingdom we have common law. Abroad, mainland Europe has the civil law code, which is the Roman law code, which then became the Napoleonic code. You cannot, as in the United Kingdom, you cannot leave everything, the whole of your estate, to whom you would wish. So in the United Kingdom, someone can make a will that leaves everything to a charity. In Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, you can't do that. If you imagine a cake, you've only got a slice of it, which is called the free estate, which you can leave to whomsoever you would wish. The rest of the cake is dictated to whomsoever you leave it to by the number and proximity of people. So if you have a husband and wife with 2 kids, and husband dies leaving wife and 2 kids, then what would happen is that part of it would go to the wife and the other part of it would go to the children. It depends how many children there are left as to who gets what, and there are all sorts of variations on the theme. But the essence of a will abroad is not as common as the essence of making a will in the United Kingdom. And there is also a change now which you can get round by using a European will if you fall into habitually resident, or you have a connection by way of nationality to a European country, mainland European country, which means that you can use a European will under Regulation 650 of 2012 to make that sort of will. But it's very draconian. The Napoleonic Code is very draconian. You must not leave anything to chance. You must make a will, and if you're buying in Italy, I would say make an Italian will, make an English will, and put a copy of the other with the other. Put the Italian will with your notaio in Italy, where you bought the house from, or you did your rogito, your completion, so they know. And don't leave anything to chance, because it's always the case that if you don't look at it and deal with it during your lifetime, you won't care, but your beneficiaries will care, because it'll go wrong.
I think as well, an important thing on the will, if you do make one in Italy, because you are allowed to handwrite, you are allowed to write your own will in Italy. You must handwrite it. You do not do it on a computer and sign at the bottom. It must be handwritten.
Okay.
Yeah. It's called the holograph will, and you must write it all and sign it all in your own handwriting, in black ink preferably. Doesn't have to be, but preferably black ink, and not in pencil.
Okay, useful advice. And just something that you mentioned, Stefano, very briefly. Obviously, residence is not to be confused with tax residence in Italy. So people can be tax resident, which means they can stay for 6 months. Is that right? Or
a person, doesn't matter which country you go to in the world, a person will become tax resident in that country if he or she remains in that country for 183 calendar days out of a 365-day rolling period. So you could, if you're an older person, for example, traveling the world and you have nothing else to do, you could become tax resident in Italy without you knowing, because you've spent more time in your favorite Liguria area. So I always say to people, if your intention is to travel abroad, make sure that you make a clean break of 5 months in the United Kingdom and 7 months abroad, if that's what you want, or vice versa, so you don't fall tax resident to another country and you remain tax resident in the United Kingdom.
Brilliant. Okay, right, we're going to get on to some quick fire questions, because we've got loads. One for you, Dave. How easy is it to get from Rome to the Abruzzo region? Rome Airport.
Extremely easy. There's a motorway that links Rome to Pescara. It's a fantastic motorway that cuts straight through the Apennine Mountains. There is never anybody on it, so you're quite free to move along at reasonable pace. Yes, very, very, very easy.
Brilliant. This is a question, I don't know whether you know, Stefano. Do you know a UK mortgage company that would help with buying in Italy?
Barclays.
Yeah. Barclays
still help people buy. Santander.
Brilliant. That's from Caroline Miscala. We've talked about buying costs. Can you briefly break them down? Rob Brennan is asking. Some is stamp duty.
It depends. Are we taking? Let's take the usual transaction, which is you're buying your home as a second home. You have notarial fees of anything between notarial fees, not notary fees. Notarial fees of 1 to 2%. Estate agents' fees can range between 6 and 10%, 3% and 5% paid half and half by vendor and purchaser. Legal fees, if you're using a lawyer abroad, 1%, something like that, 2%. Then you've got mortgage registration tax, pure cadastral tax, archive fees, all sorts of bits and pieces, which total about 13% if you're buying a second home and not a prima casa.
Okay.
But again, just remember the cheaper properties can be much higher than that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
It's a case that if it's a lower property price, the legal costs and the associated costs will be disproportionate to the purchase price. Sorry, Liz, interrupting.
That's brilliant. Okay. People are Jonathan Coley's asking a good area for investment properties. Which areas represent best value? Well, we've already touched on Dave's. Abruzzo is very good value. Bearing in mind you pretty much focus on the Abruzzo, Dave. Linda, any other areas that are great value?
Yes, definitely. And I think everyone will be surprised to hear northern Tuscany, so the area north of Lucca. Oh, yeah. You can, I mean, at the moment we've got a property, 4 bedrooms. You can move into it. It's got a garden, 59,000 euros. So that is actually amazing value. I've got another one in the similar area, 125,000, and it's detached. Again, you can move in. I'm not saying it's perfect. You wouldn't want to modernise it. On Lake Como, you don't have as much choice, but we do have a couple of properties around the 120,000 euros. But I say looking at the areas we talked about, northern Tuscany is the area that at the moment that would be my first choice, I think.
Okay. Got a question from Safdio about the checklist, ownership, etc. Is it verified by the notary? I suppose that we should point out the difference between the role of the notary and the lawyer, Stefano.
Yes, in England we have solicitors. We don't need to see each other. One acts for the vendor, one acts for the purchase. We do everything telematically. In every other civil law jurisdiction across Schengen countries, you don't complete the transaction with solicitors. It's a notaio, in this case in Italy. He is a state-appointed representative. He is a lawyer. He doesn't give advice. He's there to check that the vendor is the vendor, the purchaser is the purchaser, that the right amount of purchase price is paid, that the taxation is paid to him, because he also acts as a collector of taxes, and he also acts as a collector of taxes for the vendor, because in certain cases there could be an element of capital gain to pay, which is retained by the state. So he is not there to give you advice. A notaio or a notaire in France or a notario in Spain or in Portugal are state-appointed representatives who are called the public authority, the known as an autorità pubblica, and they are an extension of the arm of the government, and they're there to do all these administrative things. They also act as a repository for title deeds. Once you've signed your document, you never see the rogito. That again, he will see that. You'll get a certified copy, but not like in England. You will see the document again. You never see it again. You see a certified copy. So there are very, very many differences between common law in England and Wales and Scotland, Northern Ireland, and also civil law abroad in the other jurisdictions of the Schengen countries.
But it's your lawyer who will represent your interests and do all the checks that you need to
Yes,
protect yourself.
we have a checklist of things, and we will go through everything.
Linda, a quick question for you. I don't know whether I know a lot of Americans love Lake Como particularly. Is it difficult for an American to get an Italian mortgage? Do you know any clues on that one?
It is a little bit more difficult for them, I think, but it really is a case of going, we deal with a company, the company's actually in Italy, and it's a case of making some initial inquiries to see how that could work. It is a little bit more difficult than it would be perhaps for a European, or it was. Now, things have been changing quite a lot recently, so I would say that if it's an American that wants one, then put them in touch with the company, and then we can see, because this company deals with about 20 different Italian banks. So then, you know, it may be that a couple of the banks will do it and the other banks won't, because every bank, as I'm sure Stefano will tell you, they all have completely different sort of rules and regulations for how they deal with the mortgage for what they call stranieri, foreigners.
Brilliant. Dave, we have a good question from Madeline Eves. What costs are there when you own a property, i.e. council tax? What's the running costs of I mean, maybe give an example of a property in your area. I realise that regions are going to, differ widely.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends if you're going to be resident or non-resident. So if you're becoming resident, there's no real council tax here. If it's your first property, it's your first home, and you're resident in there, the only thing you will pay is a bin tax, and that is based on the square meters of your house. So in the area where we are, let's say a property of 100 square meters, you're becoming resident, you may pay, does depend council to council, you could pay between 200 to 300 euros per year as your running cost. If you're buying it as a non-resident, so as a holiday home, you will still have the bin tax, which will be the same rate, but you will also have the equivalent of council tax. Again, that's based on certain values at your local council. Where we are, I don't think that I know of anybody that pays more than about 500 to 600 euros per year to cover both tax, unless it's a luxurious property or something like that. But most common, if you think 1,000 euros per year, I would like to think you would get a fair amount of change from that. For maybe that would include things like water as well, and some of your standing charges for electric and gas.
Brilliant. I know we've got a question of Stefano. We've touched on the residency subject, but we've got a question here from Ray Hamilton about if they're renting in Italy because they haven't had time to buy before the 31st of December. Is there a minimum length of rental contract that they have to have? Because, for instance, in Spain, you have to have a 12-month rental contract to apply.
What I'd say is I'd turn it round. You have to be very careful when you go into a rental contract. because you can't have a month-to-month rolling rental contract without having certain implications which come into place. So you must be very, very careful. You can go for a fixed term, non-renewable, 6 months, a year, whatever, and then after a certain period of time, if it's actually the rights are for the tenant as opposed to the landlord. The law protects the tenant more than the landlord. You can get a contract which automatically turns into a 3-year contract or a 4-year contract. So yes, there are contracts available. Watch this space and take proper legal advice. That's what I'd say. The other thing I'd say to you is, if your intention is to buy a property abroad and you happen to like the property that you are about to rent, then enter into a contract with the vendor that the rental that you pay can be deducted from the purchase price. Therefore, it's not dead money, and you're not just paying it to the renter, to the landlord. Sorry. So that's very important. But I'd say this: that if you're intending to move across, never buy the first property or a property at all. Move into a property, rent it for a period of time, and then after 6 months or a year even, then decide to buy, because it's sod's law that you buy and then you change your mind and then you have to pay legal fees, estate agents fees, a lot of wasted costs.
Brilliant. Okay, good advice. And Linda, very briefly, you cover the north and the south. Anya Stenberg asked, is the cost of living higher in the north than the south? I mean, generally it is, isn't it?
It is, yeah, definitely it is higher, no question about that. I wouldn't say there was, I think it depends exactly where you go, but generally speaking, you're talking about going to bars and restaurants, you will pay more in the north, and in the less rural areas, so you pay more in the town, so you pay more maybe in Florence or in Como or in those areas than you would if you went down to somewhere like Ostuni in Puglia, or perhaps somewhere in Dave's area, Pescara or whatever, or Limarche. So yes, it is higher, but I think it depends exactly where you are. And as we're talking about the cost of when you bought the property, again, that varies. So every region is a little bit different. But yes, in general, I would say yes.
Dave, a quick question for you. Health insurance requirements, anything to flag up?
Health insurance at the moment, if you wanted to become resident, again, this is all pre that dreaded B word. At the moment, if you want to become resident, you do have to have private health insurance for 1 year, and then after that time, you can apply to go into the Italian health system. And at the moment, we've done a number of policies for couples that spend anywhere between 450 to 650 per year for their first year. It may not be the best health insurance plan, but it's certainly it covers the requirements that you need to have for the first year.
Great. I think we're probably going to go in for the last question because we're running out of time. We've got so many, but this is a couple of people have asked about the subject of making an offer, a slightly controversial one maybe to end with. Someone says, there's often the expectation that you offer for 30% less, but not in Italy.
If you want to offend, then yes.
Sorry?
If you want to offend and possibly lose your house, then 30% is probably a good starting point.
Well, Caroline Misklo asked, is 10% a sort of a reasonable offer sub?
At the end of the day, an agent should try and get you the best deal. Sorry, Linda, I'll be very quick. An agent should try and get you the best deal wherever possible. Italians are very easy to offend. It's quite simple, the negotiations here. I think in the UK, we tend to fight down to the last £50 if we can get that. In Italy, it tends to be an offer goes in and the owner will more than likely say, no, we will not accept that. I've spoken to my family and this is what we will accept. And that tends to be, so obviously speak to your agent. They should have a rough idea where to go in, but don't go in thinking that all Italians need to sell and they will take any offer on properties just because there's the COVID virus at the moment, which is worldwide, but also because of the Italian economy. Don't take any of that into consideration. Italy has always had a strange economy, so Italians will sell for their reasons, not for what we think they are.
And I think it's true that you should just find out the history of the property. If it's been on the market for 3 years, maybe they're slightly more keen to sell. The agent's job is to find out exactly the motivation of the seller as well. So, okay, do you want to add a final point, Linda?
Sorry.
Go for it.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that's exactly right. I mean, as I was saying before about this property, at 60,000. Sometimes properties are on the market at really the right price. So you might be able to offer a couple of €1,000 or 3 or 5 more. We always try to negotiate the very best price for our clients. But, if a property's been on the market a long time, it might be because it was too expensive in the first place. So it's very much relying on your property consultant, who should be able to help you with that. But yes, don't think, and 30%, absolutely not. It will be extremely unusual for any. I don't think I've ever had that happen in the whole time I've been selling property. But you can't really work on a certain amount. You can't say, well, it's 10% or 5%. I think it depends on the property very much, and take advice very much on that.
Yeah, I think the key is doing your research, seeing what else is out there, and getting online. And we've got to close up now, but there's lots of resources on aplaceinthesun.com. There's a downloadable guide to buying in Italy. There's area guides, there's case studies, there's lawyers on there, there's mortgage advice, currency advice. So I'm sorry that we haven't answered all the questions. I've skimmed through a small chunk of them, so I think we'll have to have another Italian buying seminar to get through some more. But thank you for listening, and thanks to my panel. That's been great.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much, Liz. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.